So here's our footage, and what we want to do is we want to rotoscope him and separate him from his footage so that we can do some things like this, right? Essentially, we're doing a rotoscope to act as a green screen, and we'll dive into how all this is done. But essentially, this can operate where you replace the background, right? Because this is the original background. But you can replace backgrounds and things like that, but without a green screen. It's definitely more brute force, takes longer to do, but you can do it. And sometimes we definitely get shots where we need to do that. In this example, you can also use it to cut a hole out of the background, right? And I just use the same rotoscope, and I just turn the mode instead of keeping him to actually get rid of him and cut a hole in the background. And so from here, After Effects has this content aware. So if you open that up and you cut a hole in something, you can click this generate fill layer, and it will create a fill layer and fill this with what it thinks should be in the background. So it's a little AI algorithm. So it's pretty cool. So I would definitely encourage you to play around with that. And then from here, like I added him back on top, right? So I've got him, I've got the fill layer, and then I've got the background layer. And then you can do effects to him on top of the actual original footage. So for instance, okay. And so we're going to take a look at some of this stuff and how to do some rotoscopes so that you can replace backgrounds, or you can separate somebody from their background and do effects to them. The internet is chock full of things like this, but let's go ahead and jump right in and start looking at rotoscopes. Hey guys, so we are going to jump into rotoscoping now. Essentially what rotoscoping is it's going to be tracing your actor or an object, or even cutting something out of a scene, but you're essentially doing a manual green screen, right? You're tracing the actor and cutting them out, okay? And then you're left with just them, okay? It's almost like if you could take scissors to this and cut out your character, that's essentially what it is. So now green screen or something like that is the ideal way to go, or some, a matting type of a process. Now, we don't always get footage, or we don't always get VFX tasks where there's something that's super helpful like that, right? We'll get footage or something like this where we need to separate the character manually from the background. So we're going to look at rotoscoping and how you would do that. Now, there's two ways that you can go through rotoscoping. You can go through the pen tool, or you can go through the roto brush. And the roto brush can make this process a lot easier and a lot quicker, but it's also, I've found, to be a little spotty on when it works and when it doesn't. So I would encourage you to definitely look into the roto brush, but we're going to go with the traditional rotoscope method, and so I'm going to introduce that to you. Now, rotoscoping is a brute force method, so it's a lot of work by hand, and it can take a little bit longer. Now, having said that, I want to show you some tricks and things like that will speed up your process, because if there's 24, 30 frames a second, and you've got minutes, that's a lot of frames that you've got to essentially do a rotoscope for, and that could be really hard and could take a lot of time. So I want to show you some methods to speed up your workflow a little bit. And so yeah, let's just go ahead and dive right in and take a look at that. So I'm going to click on the footage, right? I've already made my folders and drug the footage out, made a comp and put it in my comps folder, and so I've already got my footage in my comp, and you guys should be pretty comfortable with that at this point. So I'm going to select my footage, and I'm going to come up here and select my pen tool. Now, just as a reminder, the middle mouse rolls in and out. Spacebar allows you to grab your canvas and move around. FYI, if whenever you're making masks, and this will happen sometimes, if you accidentally move your footage and you could be zoomed in and you don't realize that you moved the footage, and you zoom out and you're like, oh no, I moved the footage and it was a while ago, and so you can't just do Control Z. One thing you can do over here is if you just click on the footage and type P for position, that'll bring up your position. And what you want to do is you want to type 960 for the first number and 540 for the second number. and that'll just put whatever your footage is back in place. Okay, so I'm going to click P to get rid of that. But yeah, just click on your footage and type P. Okay, so we're going to jump into our pen tool. So with the footage selected, remember, because if you don't have the footage selected, you'll make layer shape layers, and we don't want to make those. So we want to make sure that we've got our footage selected, our pen tool selected, and now for some strategies. So what we don't want to do is try to rotoscope this whole thing, because we will have to animate that mask over time, and with something like that, it's going to get very convoluted and very messy. And so what we want to do is we just want to break this down into elements, and we just want to track or rotoscope those elements. Okay, and so we'll do like the hat, the head, the arms, the bat, the torso, and like legs and like things like that separately. So yeah, we just break it down into components and track those. So let's go ahead and get started. We're just going to dive right in. Got my footage selected. What I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and just start rotoscoping this hat. And one thing you'll notice is I don't want to click and make a bunch of little points like this, because when I change the frame, I'm going to have to move all of those points to match back up to where he is later in time. And that could be a lot of work. So what you want to do is you only want to click and make points where you have to. Maybe I'll start here so it makes a little more sense. Like I don't want to click and make all these little points when I don't have to. So what you want to do, okay, is click, and then you want to click and drag, and this will give you this tangent handle. And then from here, you'll notice that we've made a curve that can kind of follow along, right? So now I've got this curve that's shaped to follow the hat. Now, the other thing I'll point out here too, I'm still on my pen tool. I can still edit this curve, okay? But you'll notice as I pull this handle down, this handle changes, or if I pull this one down, that changes. This is typically what I want, okay? But there's times when you have to turn a corner, and that can become problematic. So one thing you can do is if you hold Alt, you can break that. And now once it's broken, I'm no longer holding Alt. It is broken. Now if you need to get that back in place where you move one and the other one moves, you got to get them back on like a flat plane. So and the way you do that is if you hold Shift, you can snap that. And I'm going to hold Shift. I'm going to snap that, and now they're back together on the same plane. Okay, so let's do some of that, and let's just start rotoscoping this a little bit. Okay. Now, you want this to be as good as possible, right? You want to spend as much time to make this as good as you can. Having said that, we only have a certain amount of time for this video. I don't want this to go on super long, so I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. Okay, and so I'm going to go pretty quick here. But having said that too, like you want to also make things as quick as possible, right? You don't want to take longer than you need to when doing rotoscoping. Okay, let's click back on that dot, because there might be time limits and things like that, or deadlines that you need to get things done. Click back on that point and keep going. So I can't go to earlier points and click on it while I'm still on my pen tool and edit it. The problem is if I do that and I go to click, I'll make a new mask. So you just need to make sure you come back and click on your last point, and then you can keep going on. Okay, so I'm going to rotoscope this, and so we're just going to do this super fast, just to get this done. Actually, we're doing just the hats. So once we come in here and we hit kind of like the head, I'm not going to worry so much about it. I'm just going to come and I'm going to click a few dots in here because I'm only worried about the hat. And then when I get closer to here, again, I'm going to then start rotoing the hat and getting that shape again. And hopefully this will make sense as we start to step through this and combine masks and so forth. Okay, and then once we come around, if we just click on that first dot, it'll just close our mask. And so at this point, we have a rotoscope for the hat. And if I click on my rotoscope or my roto layer and I type M once, we'll see the mask in the path, and that's where we're going to operate. If I click it again, that goes away. If I click it twice, that'll bring up the mask and all of its properties. And so we'll talk about mask expansion and mask feather a little bit later, but that'll help clean up your rotoscope. Okay. And so from here, what I want to do is let's just click in there. We want to get to this. So in, and we can see that. I want to be able to animate this mask over time. So immediately I want to make sure that I'm off my pen tool, I'm on my main selection tool. If I scrub over in time, you can see that essentially he moves out of the mask. So we have to animate the mask to move with him. So I want to make sure I'm at the very first frame. And we have that little stopwatch. And if we click that, that'll make a keyframe. And I can see that here. And so I'm just going to move out in time a little bit. Okay. And I don't want to put a keyframe every single frame, right? I want to put as few keyframes as possible because that's just going to help me go a little quicker. And so from here, I really want to be able to see the rest of the footage while I do this work. So I'm going to click where this says add. And I could do subtract, by the way, and that would cut things away. But I'm going to primarily operate between add and none. And so if I go to none, the mask is still there. I've just turned it off as far as like making it actively cut things away. And so now I can see the mask. Now if I zoom in, you'll notice that each one of these dots is filled in, and that means that they're all selected. And I can actually just move them all roughly into place. Now, the way I tend to work is having them all selected, then a section, and then individual ones. Okay? And so at this point, with them all selected, another thing that you can do is you can double click on one of them and it'll bring up this box. And if you notice, anywhere that I click out here, you'll see these double arrows and I can rotate. Okay? And then there's these little boxes on the box, and that means if I click on one of those, I can kind of squish things into place a little bit. Okay? So we can do some of that and get it roughly into position, and this will help out quite a bit. Once you have that kind of where you like it, just hit enter on your keyboard and it'll drop it. The next thing that I want to show you is if I just select, let's just say, oops, right there I'm moving my footage, so I'm going to do Control Z to make sure I'm clicked on my mask. I'm going to drag a box around just an area, and if I double click on this, well, first off, you'll notice, right, that these are shaded in, and then these ones over here are hollow, right, these little points. So the shaded in ones are the ones that I have selected. And so if I double click on one of those, you'll see that I get a box for just that area, and then I can manipulate just that area however I want. Okay? And so I tend to work like that, right? The whole mask, and then areas, and then individual points as needed. Okay? And so that sort of stuff will just help your workflow speed up a little bit, and it'll help this go as quick as humanly possible. Okay? Now, another thing that I'll point out real quick too, so if you remember when we were on the pen tool, we could use Alt and we could break these. Well, when you're in your main selection tool and you're coming back to edit, you have to use Control, and then you can break some of this stuff. Again, if you want to get that back, it's just Shift, get those all back on the same plane, and then you can kind of manually do that. And the second we're inside of his area, I know that I'm going to rotoscope that back in, so I'm not concerned about this rotoing and staying like perfect to the hat, right? Because I'm going to be rotoing his face back in. So the second I am inside of his face or his head, I'm not trying to like really work that. I'm just dropping down a few points in case I need to pull those out later. Okay, so this would be that type of strategy. Cool. And let's change this back to add so we can see how that's working. So I put one keyframe and I put a second keyframe. And now I'm just going to drag in between. And essentially we're letting After Effects do some of the work, right? So if you look at this mask, that point's right here. After Effects is moving that point into position to match up to that keyframe. So After Effects is already doing some of the work for us. We're going to have to help it a little bit. So I usually drag in between keyframes and find where it feels the most off. Change that to none. Double click. And then we'll just kind of push that back into place. Again, we'll use our expansion and our feathers to kind of clean that up. And now I'll drag in between these two keyframes and only fix what I need to fix. Okay, change this back to none. So from here, click off the mask, and then, yeah, and the reason why I click off the mask is it's hard to see if I have the mask on, what's happening, so I'll click off, and then I'll scrub, and then reselect the mask if I need to do some changes. And so that's holding, kind of pops off there a little bit. And then also your page up and your page down key will allow you to step through frame by frame. And actually that frame doesn't look like it's really moving on that very first frame. So let's go ahead and just move that keyframe over a frame. Now let's see how that's looking. Cool, so it seems like it's getting off there a little bit. Okay. And essentially, that is my strategy. So I'll jump out here. So it looks like he stops moving. And then I'm going to move this mask again. Oops, not that one. We don't want to use the mode. We want to use that. Change that to none. Click back on the mask, and then I'll double click. So again, just remember, if you don't have the mask selected and you go to move, it could drag the footage. I'm not doing it so much right now. If you click on the footage, it will. but you want to make sure your mask is selected to edit your mask. Okay, I'm going to double click on that, change this back to none, double click on one of those, and then move that in. Cool. And so at this point, I think you see this strategy that I'm doing, right? I'll take big jumps and then come back in and only make keyframes where I need to, right? Okay. And so from here on out, I think I'm going to speed up the video until the hat is done, and then we'll kind of discuss next steps and so forth. So at this point, I'm going to speed things up. Okay, so my video apparently crashed while I was making the second part of it, but I kind of want to explain real quick what I've got going on here. So essentially what I'm doing to make to add to the rotoscope is as I just drag the footage down here, and then like for the bat, I would mask out the bat, and I'll continue recording and stuff. But I kind of want to explain kind of what's going on. So what would happen then, I rotoscope that layer, then I would copy the mask and then kind of paste it back onto the mask work that I did on that layer onto here. And so here what you can see is you've got the orange one for the hat, but I've made a second mask that I copied off that other layer that I animated that is essentially the head. And so you can combine these two to create one giant rotoscope, but we're basically breaking it down into areas to make it a little easier and a little more doable for us instead of like one giant mass that gets really hard to control. So I'm going to continue on here. I went ahead and actually drug down this again, and I made a mask for the torso. Okay, so I'm about to copy this mask that I did for the torso right here over onto this layer right here. Now, if I do that, I want you to notice something. So I click on this mask, and I do Control C, and then I click up on this layer, and I do Control V as in Victor. So you need to make sure that you are where the keyframes start for your mask. Copy the mask, and then paste at that exact same time to your primary layer, and then you know that the keys will line up. So most of the time that'll be at the beginning, but if you didn't rotoscope something till later, you would just want to make sure that your time slider matched that in time. I'm going to rename this. So now I can turn that off. And from here, I'm going to go ahead and let's do this. Let's see how this is looking so far. Cool, so we're getting some of this rotoscoped out. And yeah, let's continue on with, I think I'll do sleeves, because I don't want to fight that into the arms. I just want to be able to do the sleeves and then do the arms. I think that'll be the simplest way to do that. And yeah, we should be good. So let's check that out. All right, guys, so I wanted to give you a sense of what the final rotoscope looks like, just so you get an idea where we built this rotoscope based off of several different masks, and you can see each mask has its own color. And just FYI, you can always change color if you want to just by clicking on that color swatch, and you can go pick a completely different color if you wanted to. So like that arm is now green and so forth. But essentially, if I play this, we should see something that feels like a green screen, but there was no green screen. He was rotoscoped by hand, and so he was separated from his background. And then you can go and do all that same sort of stuff that we did before. You know, you could do like a disintegration effect or an explosion effect or whatever you want to go with, uh, what kind of effect you want to do. So essentially, there's a ton of like different disintegration effects out there on the internet. I can show this to you guys if you want me to, but this was not hard to make. This was really, really simple. Okay, so I wanted to add in a little addendum to this video because I told you that I would discuss expansion and feathering on the video, and so I wanted to make sure that that was covered in here. And so, kind of looking at this rotoscope again, if we hit M, we can see all of our masks. Okay, I'm going to collapse that, and what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to hit F. And that's going to bring up the mask feather for all of these layers, okay? And so you can see that I just essentially set the feather to 2 for each of the masks. So if I click on the first mask and I hold shift and I click on the last one, then I can just come in here and I can feather this for all of them on anywhere, right? I could just click on this one. It really doesn't matter which one I click. But if I did 10, I could like really soften that edge quite a bit. Or here, I'll throw it up like somewhere like really crazy high. We'll do it like 100. And so here, you can see like I feathered it so much now that we're seeing the grass again, right? And so I don't want that, obviously. So I'm going to keep this at 2 because I felt like 2 softened it just a tiny bit, but didn't make the edges so crisp. And so these numbers stand for pixels. And so I just feathered that by 2 on the pixels. I'm going to click this. I'm going to collapse this again. If I hit M, the letter M twice, that'll bring up everything. I'm going to click on the first mask. Shift click on the last mask. And here you can see the expansion. That's the other thing that I did. And the reason why I did that, let me put this back at 0. Let's see if we can click off. I'm not really seeing anything too much. Maybe a little bit of grass right here. But the expansion can either grow out or cut in. So let me kind of demonstrate that for you. So the way I use the expansion is if there's a little bit of funkiness on the edges, you can shrink that just a little bit by a -1 or something like that. And it cuts in just a little bit to kind of hide any of those little imperfections. And so if I do this by something crazy, we'll do 50, you can see what it's doing. Or if we did it by 50, a positive 50, you can see that it's growing out, okay? And so I just set that to a -1, and then the feather to 2 just to soften it. So just shrink in the rotoscopes just a hair, and then soften the edges of those rotoscopes. Anyways, I hope that's helpful, or I hope that makes sense, and I hope this has been helpful.